In 1991, the ships stopped coming. Almost overnight, an island of 11 million people lost the oil, the fertilizer, and much of the food it had imported for 30 years. Cuba called it, with grim politeness, the special period in a time of peace. In plain terms, the tractors had no diesel, the fields had no chemicals, and the average Cuban would lose around 5 to 9 kilograms off their own body in the years that followed. When the Soviet Union fell and the American embargo tightened its grip, a food system built on imported inputs simply seized. The question that would decide whether people ate was brutally simple. Could a city feed itself from the dirt beneath its own feet? The obvious answer was to ship in more. But there were no ships, no dollars, and no friendly government left to send them. The second answer wait for the embargo to lift is still being waited on 30 years later. So the answer had to come from inside the city. And on the eastern edge of Havana, in a Soviet-style housing district called Alhama, it came from a man named Miguel Salcines. Salcines was a trained agronomist who had spent his career inside the state farming machine, the machine that had just broken down. In 1997, he walked onto 11 hectares of rubble-strewn scrubland on the city's fringe. Broken concrete, poor soil, the kind of ground nobody farms. He couldn't plow it, and he couldn't feed it with fertilizer, because there wasn't any. So he built the soil on top of the ground instead. The technique became Cuba's signature, the organoponico, long-walled beds, raised above the dead earth and packed with a mix of soil and organic matter, a garden you construct rather than one you inherit. The organic matter came from the humblest possible engine, worms. Salcines set up beds of red worms that ate crop waste and manure and turned it into rich, dark vermicompost, the fertilizer the country could no longer buy. Pesticides were gone too. So instead of spraying pests to death, the farm recruited their predators, beneficial insects, botanical repellents like neem, and companion plants that lure trouble away from the crop. None of this was nostalgia for old ways. It was cold arithmetic. Without oil to move food into the city, food had to be grown where the people already were walking distance from the plate. And Salcines built the farm not as his own, but as a cooperative, a worker-owned enterprise where the people digging the beds share in what the beds produce. Today, the organoponico vivero Alhama spans those same 11 hectares, worked by around 150 worker-owners. Between the beds sit worm bins, seedling nurseries, herbs, and rows of ornamental plants, sold to keep the whole thing solvent. It grows more than 300 tons of pesticide-free vegetables a year, not in a distant province inside the city, sold at a stall by the gate to the families who live around it. And Alhama is not alone. It became a flagship of a citywide push, thousands of organoponicos, gardens and plots that, at their peak, let Havana produce the majority of the fresh vegetables its residents eat. Grown within the city limits themselves. It's worth being honest about the cost. This was survival farming, born of a catastrophe nobody would choose. And Cuba's food system still strains under the embargo and its own economy. But necessity forced an experiment the rest of the world only theorizes about. Because the quiet lesson of Alhama is this: a city can grow a serious share of its own food without imported chemicals, on ground everyone had written off if it decides the soil beneath it is worth building. How 11 hectares of rubble came to feed a district, exactly how the beds and the worms and the cooperative fit together, and what it would take to do it where you live. That's the full breakdown, and it's in the link below.